Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. My guest on the podcast today is Ben Levy. Ben is a highly experienced senior manager at Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. During his 28-year career as a firefighter and officer, he has gained a significant operational experience, and he's held a wide range of leadership positions with a primary focus on operational command, safety, technical advice, assurance, and research and development. Ben is also the strategic lead for fires in tall buildings for the National Fire Chiefs Council. And he is focused on advancing techniques and procedures for firefighting, rescue and evacuation in respect of all buildings. His primary concern is the safety of both firefighters and affected occupants. Ben recognises that a legacy of design, construction and build issues continue to create a significant challenge to the fire and rescue services responders, and in response he continually emphasises the importance of outstanding levels for preparedness and response to fires in tall buildings. And in today's episode, we're going to speak about a whole range of tactics, the thought process behind it, the latest and greatest in the National Operational Guidance, and also what Ben is pushing for, along with his colleagues, for a greater level of preparedness and response to these very, very complex and difficult fires. In today's episode, we also look to see how these big, complex incidents have been handled overseas and make some comparisons of how such events are managed from international observations. Ben has had the privilege of looking reasonably closely at tall buildings, firefighting techniques, and the cultural response of the communities they protect in Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia. So there's a lot to get at in today's episode. Ben is a real font of knowledge and honestly a right laugh to have a chat with. So I think you're going to get a lot from today's episode. He's quite a practiced speaker, so he knows how to get the point across, and he's very articulate in the way that he does it. So I know you're going to enjoy today's episode. Big thanks to Ben and the Greater Manchester team. We constantly do lots of great work with them. They were also complimented when we recorded with Dr. Paul Christensen on a recent episode, and the lithium-ion battery research they've been doing down there as well. So a lot of great things coming out of Greater Manchester, and we look forward to doing more work with them in the future on the podcast. But for today, let's get in there with Ben and talk about high-rise and fires in tall buildings, and I'll see you on the other side. So Ben, from a purely practical firefighting and command sort of position, what are the challenges that are facing fire and rescue services as we deal with this kind of stark reality and, as I've heard you speak about before, that sort of lingering legacy of design, construction and maintenance issues with the built environment that we're responding to?
Well, I suppose, Pete, we are taught as young, enthusiastic firefighters that everything's going to be okay.
Yep.
And when it's not okay, we'll turn up and we'll save the day. And when it comes to tall buildings, very often, certainly the teaching I had when I go back to, the 1990s was trust the building. Somebody's built this building, it'll be fine until people move in and cause fires. And there's some real assumptions made in those buildings. We'll assume that the building's been constructed right. We'll assume that anybody in that building can leave that building at any time they choose to do so. We'll assume the building's being well managed. We'll assume that if a fire does happen, it will be confined to a reasonably small place. That those fires are not started by arson or, God forbid, terrorism or any deliberate fire setting. That the building's been occupied as it was intended and there's a strategy in place for that. And that the fire service will get there on time with plenty of water and personnel numbers to deal with it. And very often, that's the case. Unfortunately, where one of those steps that I may have outlined there, one of those assumptions does not fall into place, as you look around the UK, you look around the world, catastrophes occur. And I think we really have got to be prepared now that it might not be okay. And I think when I joined as a firefighter, for many years before then, there had been precursor warnings. You can go right back to 1973, Summerland, the big fire there. You can go back to the fires at Lakenhall House, Knowsley Heights, Garnet Court, Harrow Court, all these fires that preceded Grenfell.
The Lakenhall House one especially, and how Peter Apps wrote that as the prelude to the book, Show Me the Bodies. Wonderfully written that was, wasn't it? It was so... Yeah. I loved having him on. Oh, such a great guest, because it was just such a... But this wasn't the fire of Grenfell. And you're like, oh, whoa, that little pivot. Yeah. And it was one of those, we knew this was coming, which sounds so there's a sinister element to that, isn't it? Because it suggests there's a conscious ignorance to the things. Just expand on Summerland for me, because we haven't covered that as a debrief on the podcast. It is on our list, but that might be an incident that's slightly less familiar to people, certainly for people joining the services now. Could you just expand on that one for us? This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
Yeah, Summerland was an indoor holiday theme park event building with swimming pools, slides, an indoor oasis, I suppose, I think somebody said.
A bit like Centre Parks, wasn't it?
Yeah, that type of thing. And in 1973, there was quite a significant fire. This was in the Isle of Man. And 50 people died in the middle of the day at that fire. Because maybe not cladding as you think is on the outside of tall buildings now, but certainly it was the external structure of the building was highly flammable. You mentioned Pete Apps there. And those that don't know Pete Apps, editor for Inside Housing magazine. If you've not read his book, Inside House, Show Me the Bodies. Yeah. If you've not read his book, and I'll give a shameless plug for Pete and his book, it's an outstanding book. And if you don't read that book and feel I need to be better prepared as a firefighter and an incident commander, then, you'll surprise yourself. Within the first 3 chapters, or even the first chapter, you will be hooked on that book as a firefighter. I guarantee it. It's worth the tenner or whatever he charges you. It's very, very good.
So well written. It's really well written.
And there's another gentleman that we know of. He was a resident of Grenfell Tower, Eddie the Farn. And Eddie wrote a blog in advance of Grenfell. He also foretold Grenfell. These are not new issues. I will admit, and I am embarrassed to admit, that I wouldn't say it took me by surprise, but when I looked back with my role now as an incident commander, as what I thought was an experienced firefighter with many years service, I was surprised what I didn't know, what I hadn't realised. And I go back, there's a reason for that, Pete. I cut my teeth in high-rise firefighting in the tall buildings of Salford, which is a city in Greater Manchester. And back in those days, there was a lot of tall buildings that had quite socially deprived areas.
People of low socioeconomic level, weren't they? Really struggling with life a little bit, bless them.
It was social housing. Many, many deliberate fires set in occupied and unoccupied areas of the buildings. Damaged landing valves. Mattresses were set fire on hallways. Foam-filled furniture was set fire to in the lift car and sent to the top floor. All this. And I would drive to work next day and I'd go to myself, Red Watch have had a job last night, because you saw the smoke stains up the outside of the building almost daily. Pete, never did I commit, and I was incident commander on many of these incidents, never did I commit more than 2 firefighters and 1 45mm jet into those flats, because they could always put the fire out with 1 BA set, 1 jet, and it never really left the corridor of the flat that was on. Yeah, if you go back to the early 90s, there was a Department of Environment report, like a Public Select Committee report, that seriously foretold this. And they said right back to then, there are materials being put on the outside of buildings that could spread fire to other windows above the fire compartment. And most of us, not all of us, most of us, I wouldn't say ignored it, but we didn't take account for that. And where this points me to now, because the technical solutions for this, Pete, is not my area. No. I'm an operational firefighter, and I have a responsibility for ensuring that the UK Fire and Rescue Services, supported by the National Fire Chiefs Council, is nothing less than outstanding in their preparedness to respond to tall fires. in our
But at
increasingly
some
rising
point,
built
that
environment.
interlocking perfect scenario has to interact with the design of those buildings. And sometimes it reminds me, and it's said especially with Peter Apps's book, the old 3Bs, BS baffles brains, as people would say. And when we're designing our systems and our response and our tactical strategies for deploying to these buildings in the worst case scenarios, they are very reliant on those individuals with the knowledge of these materials. I always think of the analogy of like an aeroplane made of steel, and this might be a really rubbish analogy. We can cut it out or tell me I'm stupid. But to someone that doesn't understand aerodynamics, I go, but that's a big metal tube in the sky. It's never going to fly. Do you know what I mean? So if we look at something on the outside of the building and go, that's really flammable, what a stupid thing to put on there. And then somebody who's theoretically a subject matter expert in building construction goes, no, Pete, you don't get it. That's never actually going to catch fire. So it's largely irrelevant because the compartmentation of the building is designed in such a manner that it will never spread through that window and all this sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean? And then there's just an assumed trust because that person is a subject matter expert. And I'm assuming there's a tremendous amount of reinforced, heavily legislated procedures that would stop this person from ever pursuing reduced cost benefit for nefarious means or something. Do you know what I'm trying to allude to there? We have to interact with that thing at some point in time. We have to reach over the chasm, don't we, to the private sector and shake hands of trust to say we're going to base our plan on the thing you've told us is true.
Well, I mentioned to you before, Pete, the assumptions one might make as a firefighter, an incident commander attending a tall building fire, that it's designed right, it's been looked after right. Well, when that doesn't happen and it goes wrong, and the lemons line up and it's a bad day, what might go wrong? It will be the fire is beyond our capabilities to put it out. It might just be too big to put out. Why? Is it a wind-impacted fire event? Is there cladding that is flammable? Is there ineffective water? Is there a delay in the firefighters getting to a point where they can actually start a positive intervention? Is there some dominating smoke in the stairwell because of poorly fitted or poorly maintained fire doors? Whichever it is, if it's not going according to plan, and the Americans, I'm privileged enough to be linked in across the world on this subject, the Americans particularly will use the phrase, the fire is out the box. For us, that means it's breached the compartmentation. Once the fire is out the box, we're playing catch up. We're plan B, C, D, E. Now, all our planning and assumptions for firefighting have been based upon the fire being in the box, our firefighters being able to get into an appropriate position to do so via firefighting lifts or any sort of ascent up the building. Where that is not the case, we are now the safety net to make that right. If you were a passenger on the plane and the plane failed, you're just going down with the plane. But when you're in a tall building, the tall building is failing, it's the firefighters that have to do something about that. And the key to this, Pete, is knowing that the building is not performing as it was designed to do. At what point do
you accept failing? Because I would also just add, and just to interrupt you for a second as you continue, it's recognizing it as a what if versus a never going to happen. Because I think before we were always operating out of a never going to happen, even though there was an overwhelming internal visceral feel that I don't feel totally confident with what I'm saying here, but we didn't train for the what ifs much because it was always a stay put. It was always a stay put because it was never going to happen. It's like the old Titanic. It will never sink. You don't need all the lifeboats. It's never going to sink. It's never going to sink. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I forgive me if I've already used this phrase. I've used it so often, I say to many people exactly this. It is a stark and predictable reality that we are going to attend another tall building that is failing in fire. You've just got to look around the world. It's happening. Valencia, Milan, New York in the Bronx.
What was one that just recently happened? I was speaking to... Russ Timpson says hi, by the way. I was speaking to him yesterday, and I know we'll be joining each other at the Tall Buildings Conference at the end of this year. Russ has just asked us to come on as the official podcast for it, and I said I was speaking to you today, and he's like, no way. Ben's going to be one of our keynote speakers. So he obviously speaks very highly of you, but he said he spent a lot of time yesterday or the day before looking into an incident that literally has just happened, and I can't remember it, and I apologise if you can't remember either. I don't mean to put you on the spot. But you're right. They're becoming uncomfortably frequent.
Yeah, they are. And it's interesting. If you are a firefighter in those scenarios, and I use the term firefighter quite loosely, I consider myself a firefighter, but of course I'm speaking to firefighters and incident commanders when I say this. If you are that firefighting team that are attending an incident and the building is failing, I'll use that phrase. The key bit in that is you need to know the building's failing. If you find out too late, you may have missed the crucial opportunity to start going for your plan B, C, D, and E. And it's a real, we go back into what is a firefighter's job? A firefighter's job is to put the fire out. Well, sometimes, if I look at fires close to home, we had a very significant cladding fire in my area, the Cube in Bolton.
Yeah.
And at the Cube in Bolton,
great debrief, by the way. Yeah. Really visually interactive. We'll put a link for that for people to go and have a look. It was very well done.
Okay, thank you. And if I look at a fire like that, or you may look at the fire, some will be familiar who listening to this, to a very significant cladding fire in Milan in Italy just a few years ago. Those fires are very visual. The fire service don't put those fires out. The fuel gets consumed, and in these scenarios, it's the cladding that's the fuel. So when the fire is burning itself out and potentially putting all the occupiers at threat, our job as firefighters is to make sure the people in the building can get out safely. And when buildings are failing, as we saw at many of these incidents we've talked about, and of course at Grenfell Tower, it's not just the building that's failing on the outside, the protection of the means of escape is failing. And when we attend a fire in a building, our actions, or the actions we don't take, are going to have a significant impact on the safety of the occupants.
Because I always say inaction and indecision is a decision in itself, because you're always trying to hit a moving target.
Yeah, and we hold the responsibility for the occupant safety and the resident safety once we get there. Okay, somebody's carried out risk assessments and they put strategies in place. Fine. It's all very well saying, oh, that's gone wrong. But once we get there, we take some responsibility for the occupants because we are dealing with the fire. In particular, if, for example, we decide, okay, we're going to evacuate this building, we're going to send people into the stairwell, we need to have assessed that the means of escape is still viable and tenable. We can only do that by specifically tasking members of our firefighting teams to assess those stairwells.
Yeah, stairwell protection teams.
Yeah, whether it's stairwell protection teams or whether it's external spotters or whether it's just somebody in the stairwell at the whomever it is. I'm not going to put any names on them at the moment, but it may well be stairwell protection teams, specifically with the task to assess and prepare the means of escape in case that fire gets out the box.
And to control it in an almost staged or phased, depending on terminology for evacuation, whether it's floor above, floor below, and then two at a time as we go up, or whatever it might be, rather than the bomb burst, evacuate all in that. I want to slow us down for a second, because I always have to be conscious that we don't get in our own echo chamber, and we have listeners from inside and outside the sector, but also from more ranges of experiences. So I know I'll be asking you here for a second to just repeat some of the stuff that's already in National Operational Guidance, but it will have greater context as you repeat it, because I'm sure you'll go down a few little rabbit holes. We said it's important for us to recognise when the building is failing. You've already alluded to some of the factors that would suggest this, and it's not a test, so I apologise, I'm putting you on the spot here, but could you just redefine some of those examples of the key indicators that this building is beginning to fail, and that we should be at least starting to consider what an evacuation process looks like? So what does it start to look like? Some of the things you would be looking for is to suggest the building is failing.
Well, if I answer it of how I expect a building to perform correctly, I expect a fire to remain contained within the design compartmentation of the building. So that requires effective compartmentation in the construction phase, no gaps around the windows, the fire doors closed properly. I expect fire doors leading off the corridor landings onto the stairwells to fit appropriately. I'd expect any active and proactive fire engineered control systems, smoke vents, the like, positive, all that to work effectively. I expect the dry rising mains, whether those be wet or dry, American listeners will know those as standpipes. I expect those to work effectively. Any one of those failing, the lifts, anything like that, any one of those failing is the beginning of that building failing under fire conditions, because it takes a management system to keep it in place.
The compartmentation one is always a very difficult one, and Michael Reich spoke a lot better than this about me, and I'll paraphrase him terribly. But as soon as we start to interact with the compartment of origin, we effectively damage the compartmentation, don't we? Because we have to, and hence the creation of the smoke curtain and things like that. So that's when the necessity of our additional means of implementing, pressurizing staircases ourselves manually or putting smoke curtains on, all this sort of stuff. We have to make it worse before we make it better, or we just leave it and hope that the building's design will keep it to that room of origin and just suffocate it through anti-ventilation or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's an important point. It's the fire is contained until we open the door, start poking our heads around it and thinking what we're going to do. And there's a really important question I encourage firefighters to ask themselves, and this is included in the evacuation decision-making model that is developed by the National Fire Chiefs Council and incorporated in policies, procedures by a number of FRSs up and down the country. And it's this simple question: can I deal with this fire? And I'm talking about a fire in a flat, in a tall building or an apartment or complex. Can I deal with this fire without allowing smoke or fire spread out of the room of the compartment of origin and into the corridor? Now, clearly, if it's a heavily pressurized fire in a flat, as soon as I open the door, I'm going to put smoke in the corridor. That's commonplace. Okay? If I think that's going to be the case, I should have prepared for that. Now, the worst case scenario, I'll come back to how you prepare for that, but the worst case scenario is, can I deal with this fire without putting smoke or flames on the floor above or any other floor? Because that's also, and these are the issues. There's 4 scenarios for a high-rise fire, Pete.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA connected firefighter platform. Now back to the show.
Scenario 1 is, it's not a high-rise fire. It's a bit of smoke on a grill pan, okay? So, and that's quite key. Not all high-rise fires are high-rise fires. Now, there's other scenarios. The scenario 2, I suppose, is the fire's contained to the compartment. So the next scenario is, it's contained to the compartment and there's a bit of spread into the corridor on that floor, but it's being held back by the doors to the stairwell. And the last scenario is, it's breached all that and it's now affecting the stairwell, which is the means of escape. And we will talk a lot of fire rescue service about the RICE principles. So the RICE principles are: R stands for rescue, intervention is I, C is containment, E is evacuation. They don't come in order, but the key point about the RICE principles is working with compartmentation to consider, when I open that door, what impact is it going to have on the rest of the building? And actually, there may be other measures you want to take or other measures we need to take before we open the door to a fire compartment. And one of the tactics I certainly encourage our firefighters here to do is, and I say it like this: you have no business putting the door into a flat fire until you put a smoke curtain on that door.
And even the door on the cluster as well. Like you say, if it's a room of origin, then the cluster flat. Always having that two-stage approach to it for me is so vital.
Because firefighters will go to a lobby and they'll open the letterbox if they've got one and assess how much smoke. Right, I've got a fire in there. Smoke curtain goes on. Because as soon as you use the door ram and put that door in, you've lost a fire door and you've impacted on another area of the building. Now, if that fire is not persons reported, and what I mean by that, if that fire does not have a reported person that needs rescuing immediately within that building, one of the principles of the RICE element is, maybe I start getting other people out on this fire floor before I open the fire compartment. Because if the building is behaving effectively, the fire shouldn't breach the compartment. And if the fire's that bad, it's already done a significant bit of damage in that compartment. So let's protect the occupants. And I have the privilege of speaking to international insurers convention or conference every year or so. And I very often say the same thing. As a firefighter, my job is not necessarily to save your building. I think it's to protect the safety of the occupants of your building, and in doing so have due regard for the health and safety of my firefighters. I'm not there to protect your financial asset. No. And if you haven't built it right, and you haven't managed it right, and you haven't secured it right, I'm sorry.
That's a you problem. Yeah.
I just want to touch a bit here on responding to fires in the term of the physiology of a firefighter as well. There are, I think the last time I looked, I think there's some in excess of 150 buildings now in the UK that are over 100 metres tall. That's quite some skyline. And it was interesting, some of the listeners will know that there was some academic research, some quite considerable academic research by a university not long ago, post-Grenfell, that suggested that trying to go beyond 100 metres up a stairwell as a firefighter is going to be very challenging. And once you get to 100 metres, having been advised, which was the guidance from that research, to take a break every 10 floors.
It's about 33, 34 floors, isn't it? Just right. For people's context. Because people won't understand metres. Certain public won't.
Yeah, I have it in my head, 32 to 35 floors. And there are over 150 buildings of that height and above in the UK at the moment. Most are in London. Quite a significant proportion are in my local area, and then they go down. Some in the West Midlands Fire and Rescue Service area, a couple in the Northwest. Beyond 100 metres, we are struggling to do anything meaningful when we get up there. And again, I would encourage any firefighters to have such buildings in their area. If you've not climbed those stairwell from the bottom to the top, go and try it out. Go and try
Steady,
it out.
Ben. You're triggering my firefighter challenge thing, and I don't want to get into some romantic conversation because it is a provocative point. But please continue.
Yeah,
you're right.
Because I've done it. I've climbed 65 floors here in my local area, and when I got to the top, I was fit for nothing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm an aging man in his 50s who tries to keep relatively fit. But I question, and clearly, I'm not going to ascend a stairwell in my role to the 65th floor and then start to make instant command decisions. That's just not the role I would carry out on a fire ground these days. I would be outside. I appreciate that. But I questioned myself when I got to the 65th floor, what command decisions could I effectively make? And they were limited for some time. So we need to avoid these rapid ascents of the stairwell on foot, carrying, under air, carrying a load of gear.
I went to the 12th floor 3 weeks ago with 6 other firefighters, and I knew it anyway, but it was very disappointing to see the mindset, state and agitation of people when we got to that floor. Yeah. And had it not have been a very small fire on a hob, which we dealt with an extinguisher, we'd have been left wanting. And one of them actually forgot their helmet. But anyway.
But failure to do that, Pete, failure to deploy firefighters up that stairwell, whether it be to reach the fire floor or beyond the fire floor to assess the means of escape, would be a dereliction, really, because at some point the incident commander may have to make a decision to evacuate the building, considering the building has either got a stay put, defend in place policy, or you still believe there are people in the building. When the incident commander has to make a decision to evacuate, they've got a duty to have assessed the means of escape before they do that. You can only do that if you put firefighters into that lift shaft. Now, I use an example here from...
Into the stairwell, sorry.
Yeah, into the stairwell, sorry. Yeah, don't put them in the lift shaft, put them in the stairwell. Now, well, there's another conversation there about using lifts for evacuation.
True.
Because,
talk to us about that, but also for people's lack of awareness, talk to us about the principle of one staircase, because this is actually a rare thing globally, and a lot of people might not be aware of it. Some people will think we're teaching them how to suck eggs because they're probably from your sphere of influence already, but a lot of people won't know this about how rare it is that we haven't enforced a two staircase principle in the UK, and again setting ourselves up to failure with these very cluttered stairwells.
Well, the principle of could be considered quite sound. You build a building that's safe. You build a building that has got a safe and secure, well-managed lift shaft. You build it with effective compartmentation. You manage the building well, so that in the event that a fire does start, it will be contained to the compartment of origin, and certainly wouldn't get into the means of escape that the lift shaft, the lift shaft and the firefighting stairwell is. And actually, what you end up with is a scenario where the rest of the occupants can stay in the building, in the other part of the building, because the fire is contained, while the fire service deal with the incident, and the lift shaft becomes the property, the tool of the fire and rescue service during that period, as does the stairwell, because that's where we base our operations. Everything's fine until it's not fine. And when it's not fine, you start sharing that single stairwell, which is sound in principle, if everything else works, with evacuating occupants, and the two don't work together. So the UK is...
But if that's assumed so safe, why are we one of only 2 countries that don't legislate it?
I think there's more than that, but there's not certain. There's certainly no. That's okay. There's certainly not many, but and I've been to I've attended tall building fires abroad, where allegedly that is the case, where there's multiple staircases and there's only one staircase. So it's not always a case where there's 2 staircases. And if you look at some of the countries and the nations where 2 staircases have been mandated, you could take the opinion that became the place. And I speak from a non-technical perspective, you understand. I speak from having spoken to people there. Their understanding may be that they had 2 staircases because they weren't so trusting of their build construction that we were. And maybe we thought post-war, when we started building these tall buildings, we were building them safe. But we know they weren't safe now. We look back on so many scenarios, collapse, fire spread, other issues that have come to play, which suggested now that it's not right. Now, 2 staircases, which are now becoming to come into fore, but it will be a long time, certainly not in my career or my new firefighters' careers, where we see that's commonplace across our built environment.
40 years at least.
Oh, easy. So what do we do between now and then? We'll wait for the 2 staircases. We're dealing with a 1 staircase scenario, and I think I said to you before we joined the meeting, firefighting a rapidly developing fire from a stairwell, whilst also trying to evacuate all the occupants from above the fire floor, I question whether both are a compatible activity to be done by firefighters at the same point. Definitely. Because you may have to prioritise one of those over the other. And I go back to my point before, it might not be my job to put the fire out just yet. I keep talking about fires overseas. So we, National Fire Chiefs Council representatives and others, had the privilege of attending the aftermath of a very, very serious cladding fire overseas not so long ago, or a couple of years ago now. And at that fire, I'll just give you some facts. There's a reason I'm not mentioning the country or the building.
It's fine.
No firefighting took place in the early stages of that incident for a number of reasons. There was issues with accessing the rising main in the building. There was a complete destruction of the cladding system external to the building. And there was also some communications issues by the firefighters that attended in the technical aspect of how their radios operated within that building, within that very large structure. Every single occupant of that building escaped unharmed, despite there being no firefighting by fire and rescue service in the very initial stages. And I say that, there was some very light firefighting, some water was being squirted from the outside, but internally, everybody's out the building beforehand. And there's another point there. One of the reasons everybody was out was not wholly down to the fire and rescue service. It was cultural.
I was about to say the proficiency of members of the public in different countries. Russ was telling me, like, when he travels, certain hotels, they've got, smoke hoods in every you walk straight in on the right hand side or in the cupboard or something like that. Yeah. 2 smoke hoods and very strict instruction around evacuation principles, and they are adhered to much more stringently. There's almost a more accountable citizenship element to it. I don't know. I wonder if in the UK we treat our citizens a bit like children. I don't know. Maybe that's offensive to say.
Well, I think there's more cultural issue. I don't think it's whether it's about how our citizens are expected to behave culturally over many generations. So if I go into a hotel in the UK, there'll be a sign on the door that says, if a fire occurs, words to the effect of, get out, stay out.
Yep.
Close the doors behind you, out you go. Whereas I have family in overseas in a number of places, and I go to hotels regularly in, for example, Italy, and there is a sign on the fire cabinet that is aimed at me, the occupier, me, the resident of the hotel for the night, that says, if there's a fire, take the hose reel and try and put the fire out. I paraphrase, but that's what it says.
Nice. Yes.
I have family in Southeast Asia, and in Southeast Asia there is a public accessing poster. Well, in this one country, the country is Vietnam, and on every public building in Vietnam there is a poster, and it words to the effect of, it's poor translation in Vietnamese, words to the translation of, these are the citizens' responsibilities for the Republic of Vietnam with regard to fire. It's a big poster. It's a bit like a health and safety poster you might get here. Number one is, basically, as a citizen of Vietnam, you are to prevent fire happening. Number two is words to the effect of, if a fire does occur, you are to mobilise enough force to deal with the fire. That is aimed at the citizens, not the firefighters. Yeah. And when I've lived out there over a period, stayed with family for a few weeks at a time, in the lobby of the 48-storey building that I stay in, there is a box, and in that box there is a breathing apparatus set, an escape sheet, breaking in gear,
I didn't know that.
Fire extinguishers, the like. And when asking who is it for, it's for either the security guard who has not really any training, or anybody else who feels like they're going to be a good citizen.
Oh, wow.
So that's very different to here. But then again, that building was occupied by people paying a lot of money to be in that building. Go back to the issue we discussed here. Much of our housing here that was traditionally tall buildings was social housing. And that's not the case now. When we go into the tall buildings in the centre of London, these buildings cost a lot of money and they're either privately owned, leased, etc. So it's different. And we may make the assumption those buildings are going to be safe. Well, speak to your London firefighting colleagues. They're not safe. Speak to your other colleagues in the fires still happen. Buildings are safe until you put people in them. And then even if they set the right fire, it might be okay, but generally it's not. And I quote a professor from a university in Manchester, in London recently, who said, many of these buildings are designed with stay put in mind. 99% of the time stay put's fine. The 1% it's not, it's an absolute catastrophe, as I said before, because the evacuation and the firefighting don't always marry up very well. Can I talk about deploying firefighters into stairwells for a bit?
I would love you to. I know it's an emotive topic, and I'm glad you wanted to go there rather than me pushing you into it. Thank you.
Yeah. And people will, if you listen to this podcast, you'll think there's a debate ongoing about whether we're talking about the control measures of deploying firefighters into stairwells. I just want to talk specifically about why we might go into a stairwell above the fire floor. I said before that it's a duty as a firefighter and incident commander to consider the safety of occupants in the building. And that might include a stay put policy. It may include defend in place, because you don't want to evacuate the whole building with a stay put policy every time somebody burns their sausages on the pan. And as I said before, not every high-rise fire is a high-rise fire. You can put it out with a size 8 boot, or a fire blanket, or a fire extinguisher.
I put that message back a few times. Fire extinguishers, one size 12.
Yeah. But once the indication, and I'm not talking policy, I'm just talking firefightership here, that you've learned through experience. Once you've got to a position of, I'm going to charge the riser here, because this is not a size 8 boot type of job. This is not a fire blanket type of job. This is, I'm going to charge the riser. Once you're in that territory, and it might be because you've turned up and you've seen smoke emanating, or the initials, or you've even
multiple
not had
reports, there's people coming down the stairwell already, there's multiple alarms on different floors have set off on the panel, and you're viscerally feeling that, don't like this.
Or it might be just your spidey sense.
Yep.
Something's not right here. then your attitude should be, whether or not it's a building with an evacuation policy that suggests people should be making their way out or not, you have to take responsibility for people in the building. And I said before you put people in that stairwell, you need to know is it safe to do so. There's a question here, what happens if it's not safe and you still want to put people in, but you need to know what risk you're dealing with. The only way you do this is taking a proactive control measure. It's a control measure. It's not a policy. It's not a practice. It's not a procedure. It's a control measure for dealing with a fire. It's the proactive control measure of actively deploying firefighters specifically with a task to assess the means of escape, potentially prepare those means of escape should an evacuation be required because the conditions deteriorate. This is about those firefighters being able to be in the stairwell and the means of escape, reporting the status of those stairwells. Those are the canaries for the building, the stairwells, aren't they? Potentially if the stairwells
important compartment in the building. Yep. So let's role play this, because I don't want us to be vague, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm your crew, you're bridgehead commander or your incident commander, whatever, and you're saying, Pete, as a control measure, I'm going to commit some firefighters to the stairs to maintain this escape route. And I'm saying, okay, Ben, just elaborate on exactly what you want me to do, sorry. I'm going to go in this stairwell, me and 3 of the firefighters. What is it you actually want me to do, sorry?
I want you to do 4 main things, really, and there's more. If I go into the operational guidance as issued by the National Fire Chiefs Council or local policies and procedures, I can summarise it really in 4 areas. One is prepare and maintain that stairwell.
Okay.
Ensure it remains clear of smoke, any other obstructions, any other hazards. So that's the first thing. Keep the stairwell clear.
Ensure it remains clear of smoke. Yep, sorry, go on.
Clear of hazards, clear of obstructions. It might be working around the bridgehead and the fire floor area to keep hose to the side.
Yep.
You're doing this in preparation as a proactive control measure. And this might mean also, if you've got a minute, start putting some additional smoke curtains on or smoke blockers.
Curtains, some PPV at the base to overpressurise the staircase. Yep.
This is in advance of conditions deteriorating. May never happen. Yep. That's the first one. The second one is, while you're up
would
there,
I actively stop people evacuating?
I don't think you can.
No, you probably
If they want to leave, they leave.
But if they start running out of floors up the top and saying,
the
fire's coming in my window on floor 28, boss.
Well, that comes on to my second point.
Notify you, obviously.
The first point is protect the stairwell, prepare the stairwell, maintain the stairwell. That's the first point. The second point that I'm going to ask you to do is provide advice to any occupants you come across. Inform them about the evacuation strategy, which may be, it's okay to stay where you are, we're dealing with it. Update them on what we're doing. Help them come out. If they want to come out, you'd advise them on a safe route down the stairs, be careful of the hose. Give them information. The third
Because in the absence of information, that's where they panic. I don't know anything. Maybe it's really bad.
Yeah. The third thing I want you to do while you're up there, out of 4, is monitor those conditions that you're protecting. Tell me, as the incident commander, what it's like up there. You're my canary.
Is there any limitations on where I am? So we're on a building of 40 floors. You're dealing with a fire on the 17th. Can I go up to the 40th if I want to?
Well, I'd ask you why you might not go up to the 40th.
Because likely if the smoke's entered the stairwell, that's where it's going to have gathered. But I do want to make sure that if anyone is on the 40th, they might likely be the first people that start coming down.
Well, many FRSs are taking the approach now, quite correctly, that as the fire rescue service and as the incident commander, if I'm the incident commander, you need to take a window of opportunity, seize that window of opportunity to assess that stairwell as quickly as possible. And it should be standard and routine practice to send firefighters up the height of the building to the top to assess. Now, that might be a waste of time. Because I may have put the fire out. I may have put the sausages out by the time we get to the top. Tough. Well, that's why we train. Imagine it's not a waste of time. And just as you reach the top 40th floor, somebody says, I've got external fire spread.
Yeah.
Pete, you and your colleague are already up there to start telling people to get out.
Or it's spread up a random void inside and boss, I've got smoke issuing on the 37th there. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
A lot of criticism of firefighters. No, criticism is too hard. A lot of feedback which is read as criticism across the world from firefighters who have delayed that proactive approach. Focused on the fire, One might use the phrase "moths to a flame" because that's what we are as firefighters.
Blinkered.
We see fire, we want to put water on it. It's in our DNA. And to tell a firefighter, don't put water on the fire yet, I want you to do the other thing, which is prepare, stealth, escape. That's what you need to do. So we talk about, you asked me the question of what do you want me to do? Or should I be doing? As an incident commander, I am going to take that window of opportunity. I'm going to send firefighters as rapidly as possible up the stairwell to assess the stairwell. Many of these stairwells, you can see the top from the bottom anyway.
Yeah.
So you get an early feeling of what's going on in the stairwell. And you come to the top and you go, right, I'm okay. Now, it's really important to do that if, let's say this is 4 o'clock in the morning and you expect everybody on the top floor to be asleep in their beds, not evacuating because it's not a common evacuation alarm system. You need to be able to do that. So they're all asleep soundly in their beds, but still check those stairwells, assess. And while you're up there, start preparing. And by the time you've got to that 40th floor, Pete, if I've not put the fire out, I'm going to send another team behind you to cover the floors below you. I'll fill that stairwell with firefighters.
Do you have a finger on the pulse numbers that you like to think? Is there a per floor?
Yeah. Many firefighters, many fire and rescue service will be looking at sending a team of 2 firefighters to cover every 5 floor of that stairwell.
Every 5 floor?
Yeah. Every 5 floors.
Oh, 5 floors,
Every 5 floors.
I was going to say.
So for your 44th,
yes, I agree, right.
For your 40th floor,
40 floors.
I'll send you and your colleague to floors 40 to 35, look after those, that stairwell.
Yeah.
I'll send the next one to floors 30 to 35. Now, people say, well, then you'll be plugging the whole building with firefighters, not enough firefighters. I would say, Pete, if your colleagues can't put the fire out in the flat on the 30th floor by the time you've done that, that is a rapidly developing fire that is being quite difficult to contain, and we're in the plan B and C category now.
And even then, 2 firefighters to evacuate 5 floors, that's going to take a bloody long time.
It depends what the evacuate, because it may be there's an evacuation alert system built into the building. And, a BA 8629 system that allows me as the incident commander to initiate that evacuation. There's a requirement on me before I do that, Pete, to have assessed the means of escape.
Let's hope we don't have any peeps. Let's hope we don't have any other challenges, or we're still operating on some assumptions, even within this plan, aren't we, about the proficiency of the building's ability to evacuate and all that sort of jazz. Because you only need a couple of people with poor mobility, and trying to navigate them down a stairwell is going to be a bottleneck very quickly. Because this was another thing in the Grenfell, wasn't it? I think Peter said it was one of the, I'm going to misquote it, landmark elements of discrimination or something he worded it out, wasn't it? Because the number of individuals with recognised mobility challenges who were not properly assessed and accommodated for in the evacuation plan for the building. The team here at the podcast are extremely excited to announce our brand new partnership with Patrol Store UK. Patrol Store has been serving the UK's police, fire and emergency communities and first responder sector since 2008, providing leading brands such as Hikes, Magnum, 511, Nebo, Op Zulu, Highlander, AKU and many, many more of our favourites. They are now also supplying bespoke uniform, PPE and station workwear to fire services around the UK. So for all our listeners that are part of your USAR, your HEART team, your ISAR team, your armed response teams, your fire investigation, your NALO, your hazmat and all of the training departments that have got your own budgets, be sure to get the absolute best for your team at a realistic price by contacting Aaron and the team at Patrol Store and referencing the Firefighters podcast. Patrol Store will also be taking part in our listener competition giveaways, as well as providing unique discounts to podcast listeners. So for people that are always asking about Hikes boots as an example, that is one unique discount code that is coming to you very soon through Patrol Store. We've also got some incredible bags. I mean, the Op Zulu bags are a game changer. So you know the really Gucci and expensive tactical black bags that everyone's using in CrossFit workouts and taking to the gym and taking to stations? Well, they've basically got that, but it's made better and costs less, because they're not slapping some Gucci expensive brand name on it and it's giving you what you want on a first responder salary. Be sure to keep your eyes in the notes of the episodes for links to unique offers and discount codes. And if you're looking to buy well and buy once, be sure to get in the notes and head over to Patrol Store UK. Now back to the show. So just expand for a second on the mobility of these individuals, because we're saying 2 firefighters per 5 floors. I just remember Peter Apps sort of expanding on the fact that Grenfell, or the failures in the preparedness for it, was the lack of preparedness for people with recognised low mobility. And he termed it something as like a landmark case of discrimination, conscious discrimination. And I know you probably know more about this than I do. If you could just expand on that.
I think, and you forgive me, Pete, if I slightly misquote some figures here, but very roughly, if we're talking about Grenfell in particular, I think there was 37 residents of the building who had some disability.
Already recognised in some form of risk assessment, because there were a lot of them in social housing, weren't they?
15 of those lost their lives. Over 40% of the residents of Grenfell who had some form of disability lost their lives. A quarter of the children died, I believe, if I recall that right. If you add that up, almost, not, I don't think it was quite, but almost half the people who lost their lives at Grenfell were either children or had some form of disability.
Because there wasn't even any recognised protected areas of refuge, or was there? Because this is an element as well that might be worth a little bit of discussion, because some of those personal evacuation plans are helping this individual to get to area of refuge in a protected staircase, and then we'll help them in a bit later.
And I this is very different, Pete, to well, if you go to the States... I
might be getting loads of overlaps wrong here. Please correct me.
It's fine. I've spoken to colleagues in the States following... there's a fire at Twin Parks in the Bronx at New York. And following that, speaking to colleagues in the New York Fire Department, they gave me some figures along the lines of 2 out of 3 people that die in fires in the big cities in the USA, they're either people of low or no income, or they're people of colour. And the link there is around the social housing. Compare that to the fire that some of your listeners will know that happened in Milan, which is a very significant cladding fire, late one August evening about 4 years ago. Those flats in that building had gone previously for somewhere in the region of in excess of 700,000 euros. It's very, very different scenarios. So when I talked earlier about my experience of firefighting, late 90s, over and over again, people setting fire to mattresses in the stairwell. I go now to the city centre near where I am. There's some very, very fancy apartments. You think it's going to be a whole different ballgame. Well, the people of fire, it's not the people that make the fire. It's fires happen. Whatever happens, the fires happen. And when everything's fine, it's fine. When it's not, we need to be prepared. And how do you know, get back to the point, how do you know that the fire and the building is failing under fire conditions? Well, you have to go beyond the fire compartment to find that out. I need external spotters. I need people on above, beyond, to the side, each side of the fire. I need people to check the stairwell, because buildings naturally become chimneys and smoke and heat and flames rise. What's happening?
Stack of that.
And you talked about, I think you suggested before you wanted to talk about the firefighters going up the stairwell. What would they wear?
I'd like to. Can we approach PPE from that perspective?
Absolutely. When I joined the fire rescue service, there was all sorts of talk about flashovers and backdrafts and what we were learning from the Swedes, and everybody was buying tin boxes to put me into to squirt water at smoke.
Yep.
And we pulsed...
Still doing it.
Yeah. We pulsed water onto smoke in the ceiling. It was all very exciting.
John McDonough Mark II pulsing robot. That's
and the old salts on my watch, who'd been in since, whenever, they said, we've always done this, but we did it for a different reason. We squirted water on the ceiling because... Well, we put water through the window, first of all, which bounced off the ceiling and spread into the rest of the compartment. And we did it to protect ourselves from falling lath and plaster floorboards and falling polystyrene ceiling tiles, because that was a thing in the 70s. And we did the same thing for different reasons, and we did okay with it. Now, when I was the very first tall building fire I attended, I would have been the number 5. Probationary firefighter the least experienced firefighter on the watch, and they'd have sent me to the top floor on
I was going
foot.
to say, did they get you to do the risers?
Yeah, on floor to the foot. Now, I wasn't sent to check on the conditions of the stairwell. I was sent to check on the conditions of the riser outlets, the landing mains, because for a number of reasons, people had a habit of undoing them, taking them off.
Chains, smashed, open, whatever. Yep.
So I was sent up the stairwell, and although I wasn't tasked with checking for smoke, preparing the stairwell, if I'd have come across an occupier, I'd have done one of those things I asked you to do before, Pete. I'd have engaged with the occupier. It's okay, madam, we're dealing with it. I'd have reported to the incident commander, there's water coming out here, or the smoke coming out here, or this doesn't feel right, the spidey sense. We did that, and that was accounted for in generic risk assessments 3.2, which is now archived. That was always a scenario. Deploying firefighters above the fire floor is nothing new. No. We've always done it.
Well, it's always search sector, isn't it? We always called it search sector, and we even put someone in charge of it, so we know we're going to do it.
Yeah. And we talked before about there's my maths and calculations, there's over 150 buildings in the UK that are above 100 metres. I challenge anybody to go and do that with a breathing apparatus set on. Now, if you need a breathing apparatus set on, fine, because
even if it's an extended duration, you still got no hope.
Nobody's policies are justifiable if they include putting firefighters into areas of the building without BA that have got smoke or irrespirable atmospheres on.
Yes,
nobody's
that's definitely not what we're saying. Yeah.
So I will deploy firefighters into areas where there's smoke and respiratory issues with full control measures, full BA. You asked about National Operational Guidance, or the National Fire Chiefs Council Operational Guidance, OG as we call it. Within the operational guidance, there's some control measures in there which talk about some of our taller buildings may be unrealistic to try and reach being limited to the duration of a BA set. Worse to the effect of that. Now, if you need a BA set, there's additional control measures are required. But where there are no control measures required in the sense of respiratory protection because the building is secure, the building is safe, and actually you're keeping occupiers on the floors above in their beds. So you're not doing anything for them. So really, it's reasonable to be able to expect a firefighter to go above a fire floor, come back to me, say, above the fire floor, boss, it's fine. There's no smoke. It's behaving exactly as you think. And that is adding to my situational awareness. And every time you ascend the floor above and report back that it's fine, that's adding to my situational awareness. So indeed, I can put this fire out without it impacting on the rest of the building. And all these tasks, Pete, are in advance of conditions deteriorating.
I was about to say, because there's almost a hypocrisy in the thought process, not in yours, but like I say, people say, well, I'm not going to send them above the fire floor in case they get overcome by smoke. But if they're overcome by smoke, you're saying the building is failing. If the building's failing, you should already be evacuating.
Yeah.
But if you're not evacuating, because you're not evacuating, then you're telling me you don't think the building is failing. So if the building's not failing, why would you not send people across? It's it contradicts itself, the thought process, doesn't it?
And we have a legal duty to plan for the eventuality that the building will fail.
Yeah.
And that the smoke will enter the stairwell. We have a plan for that. And the proactive control measure that I discussed before, it's not a policy, it's not a practice, it's a control measure. A control measure of deploying firefighters as rapidly as possible into that stairwell, above the fire, reporting on the tenability status of the stairwell. All that is likely to come before the decision to alert the occupants that they might need to get out. Because many of the occupants will remain in their beds or in their rooms that you'd want them to. Those people going above the fire floor or any part of the stairwell, those firefighters, they're there to ensure the safety of the occupants. That's what they're there for.
Can I tell you something I would like? And this will be a conversation you've had many times, but it won't have been had in a public forum. And I'd like people just to hear someone like me propose something like this and hear some of the genuine reasons whilst we steelman this point. So I want to propose something that I'd quite like to see, and you can tell me why it's a silly idea. SCBA is a form of PPE. Yeah. It's there as a control measure against irrespirable atmospheres and smoke and things like that. My helmet is there, so if things fall, I don't get hurt. You're not going to tell me when to and to not put on my helmet. As long as I have it with me, if I choose to take it off for a minute, as long as I don't get hit on the head, blah, blah, blah. If I put my CBA on, but I don't go under air, I put my tally in a board on the 4th floor, in the lobby, whatever. As long as I get to a point, or as long as whenever I get to a point where I go, that looks like an irrespirable atmosphere on the next floor or beyond this door, I'm going to choose to go under air now myself, and I'm going to make that decision, and I'm going to inform the entry control officer. Because my tally's already in the board for services that do use telemetry, all don't, I appreciate. You're going to know if I'm using it, so it doesn't really matter when but there's a big thing in a lot of services, not all, again, that as soon as I go through that board, I must be under air. I don't agree with that personally, and I would like to have the autonomy to make the decision as to when I do and do not, similar to the American model, go on air. Could you steel man why that is not safe? Perhaps why there's some good ideas there, some bad ideas, why we would or wouldn't do that?
I do not want the UK Fire and Rescue Service to follow, what did you say, the USA model. Absolutely not.
We don't want to adopt it wholeheartedly.
No, that is set on, set off, set on, set off, set on, set off. In the US and elsewhere, there are companies that will try and sell me, because they're fitted, places halfway up a tall building where I can recharge my BA cylinder. Ooh. Cabinets. No, that's not where I want to go. There's a reason that the UK is one of the safest countries in the world to be a firefighter, because we have adequate and suitable control measures.
Does that mean we're the most effective, though? We might be the safest, but are we the most effective? That's my challenge, and feel free, we can edit this out or tell me to get back in my box, or both.
I have no, don't edit it out. I have no evidence to suggest we're any less effective as a result. Okay. And how do you manage the effectiveness? Thankfully, I drive home. It's an analogy because clearly I'm not driving home in a fire engine, but I drive home my fire engine every day, and I've got a full crew sat behind me. Thank God. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is down to the countless health and safety learned through the hard way rules and regulations that this country and our fire and rescue services have put in place.
But the more we upregulate safety, the safest firefighters will never enter a burning building, because why would they? It's not very safe.
No, but if you speak to those that govern health and safety in the UK, they appreciate our risk that we
our risk level, risk appetite.
Our risk, and we deal with risk by implementing appropriate and effective control measures through risk assessments that are carried out by competent and efficient people.
We are very good at that, and a lot of other countries copy us and solicit.
But you cannot remove the fact that we enter burning buildings, and therefore we need PPE, because the hierarchy of risk control. Ideally, you've removed all the control all the risks before you even need to consider PPE. Well, we very often start the other way around. So
what's inherently dangerous about what I propose?
Yeah, well, you've got the issue of eventually you will have firefighters potentially it becoming commonplace where we do and we don't put breathing apparatus set on. For those fire and rescue services that follow the National Fire Chiefs Council operational guidance by implementing local procedures that allow firefighters to be deployed into the uppermost reaches of a building with their breathing apparatus set not fully donned on first breath, they do so with some additional control measures. It's a separate breathing apparatus board. There's a dedicated safety officer in the stairwell. There are multi-gas detectors deployed with them so that they can alert themselves early to the presence, and they have procedures and processes to follow should any of those control measures have to be implemented. What they don't include is any authority to deploy firefighters into areas of the building where there is smoke or other irrespirable atmospheres, or where the building is already known to be failing under those scenarios.
So they asked to stick solely to the staircase, and that BA set is there should the staircase become compromised. It's not for them to deploy to the 12th because they think there's something they can do in there useful.
Well, I would say it doesn't matter what scenario. If I'm an incident commander, a sector commander, and I deploy my firefighting teams to do a task, I've got to be very specific what that task is, because I have a duty and responsibility towards the health and safety of those firefighters, and part of that is about giving them a clear and efficient brief. Why am I deploying those firefighters into the stairwell? I'm deploying them into the stairwells because I have a concern that this building may fail in fire. I don't think it will, because not every building fails in fire. I'm implementing a common control measure, aren't I? It's like if I go rock climbing, I tie a rope.
Recognise risk and I'm going to reduce it. I don't expect a crash, but I'm still going to wear my seatbelt.
Yeah. Every time I go rock climbing, I tie a rope onto my harness. I never fall off.
No,
what's the rope for? It's a control measure, just in case. In case. So my firefighters, they're sending the stairwell, taking that window of opportunity for me to do the 4 things I said before: prepare the stairwell, ensure it's safe to move on through, advise occupants, tell them what's going on, monitor and report on the conditions. I'm monitoring anybody who is making their own way out in advance of me evacuating the building. They're doing so as a control measure, proactively, in advance of me needing them to do it. Because when I deploy in panic mode, because I've arrived and I haven't done that, I've already started to lose control of elements of the building. This is proactive. Secure the stairwell for my use before I actually need it. And you asked before, what are people who evacuate? Don't stop people evacuating. If you want to get out, let them come out, but let them come out under their own steam before they have to come out.
So just help me with, let's slightly go into, how are you on time? Sorry, you're okay for time, aren't you?
Yep.
Beautiful. Fire survival guidance, transitioning into a full evacuation. Talk to me now, just expand from when we're beginning to move to a point of evacuation. We've got our teams in the stairwells with their personal protective equipment, and we're looking to transition it to an evacuation. What possible methods have we got from doing that? What control measures have we got? And how does that interlink with fire survival guidance? Because you said like a minute ago, if people want to evacuate, let them evacuate. But there has been historical examples of where either members of our control team or firefighters on the ground are telling people counter information with the best of intentions.
Okay, well, what we've spoken about so far, Pete, is in advance of conditions deteriorating as a proactive control measure in case the building fails. So there's 2 distinct tools in the incident commander toolbox here. One is prior to it all going wrong. One is this isn't going right, I better do something about it. So in advance, it is take that window of opportunity I discussed before, rapidly assess the means of escape, whilst the first firefighting teams are assessing the building, because we assess above, below, and each side 360-degree assessment around the fire, which includes right up the stairwell to get an assessment of how bad this fire is, could it go, and in doing so you prepare. So all that, 9 times out of 10 will be all that's required, and by the time you've got to the 40th floor, Pete, I've put the fire out, so come back down again anyway.
It's a bit of free fizz. I'll still enjoy it, don't worry.
Yeah, fine. Now, at the same time, I need to have in advance in my toolkit what happens if I do need to go to the next stage. Now, in the place it's been called various things. Certainly in my fire message service, we originally called it high-rise immediate resident evacuation, HIRE. And nice. at the fire at Bolton in the Cube, a HIRE message was declared in full in the building that was rapidly failing under fire conditions. That HIRE message, which is now subsequently called in a lot of places IBE, immediate building evacuation, an IBE message, puts in place a number of procedures in place for the incident commander, and that will vary locally around different fire message services. Certainly in my region, it's very, very common. It declares it a major incident. It gets a load more resources on the way, separate command and evacuation units, dedicated evacuation officers, and importantly, initiates fire survival guidance calls. So many control rooms around the country would already be starting collating fire survival guidance information when they start to get multiple calls for the same building. Multiple calls for the same building is not always a bad thing. It's confirming information. I can see smoke down below. You're fine. But what we do want to do is avoid the scenarios we've had in the past that, as you've inferred, occupants have had varying levels of effective advice. And we all know about the young lady who lived and unfortunately passed away at Lakenhall House when she was on the call. And she passed away there. We want to avoid that. And, fire messages have come on leaps and bounds now with that.
I feel most for the control staff,
Yeah, I do. And
I
know friends
I feel
and
like
colleagues,
they're always set up to fail. The trauma they experience, the lack of situational awareness, not because they're stupid, just because they're not there, and they don't always get captured with welfare. I'm sorry to go down this rabbit hole for a second, but I hate it. Well, it really upsets me. I know some people have really struggled with it that I know personally, and I'm sure it's probably the same for you. It's horrible.
Yeah, even some of my friends and colleagues from my fire control here, long way from London, were involved in the night of Grenfell, and of course involved in the night of the Manchester Arena. And it's so easy to blame the first person who opens the door to the incident that if you'd have opened it in a different way, we might have gone a different direction. That's wholly and grossly unfair. But now we've got arrangements for that where through National Fire Chiefs Council operational guidance and standards and the like, where control rooms are now back in the frame of being part of the operational command team. Absolutely the right place for our control room officers to be, 100%. Now their role in this is part of the fire survival guidance, and that shared information between the first point of call caller control room to the incident commander via the bridgehead or via the sectors, whichever way it falls in place in each fire and rescue service. Now, I think some fire services refer to points of contact on the fire ground. Some might call it evacuation officers, coordinators. There's various terminology. But I need ready for when, not on every incident, but when I decide to change the evacuation strategy or determine emergency evacuation is required, I need an effective process in place.
Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial and fire training professionals. Now, next up, and widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection. This is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. Now back to the show. I've seen a lot of services move to some sort of an electronic OneDrive Excel style sheet, because it does need to be a live interactive document, doesn't it? Because otherwise the stuff... it's like Chinese whispers. It's like hard to.
I've seen some very effective paper versions, very effective, designed by firefighters, which are runners and tickets that run backwards and forwards between different parts of the incident ground. They're very effective, but they're pieces of paper at the end of the day.
What's your preferred one in utopia? What do you think works best?
Most fire services now have got electronic systems.
Yeah,
it's fine as long as you maintain contact, maintain connections. Unfortunately. They get tested on fire stations as an exercise, and then you go and use them in anger next to a massive Faraday
solid
cage.
Wi-Fi on the fire station, and then you get there and go, oh, it's not bloody working.
And you look at reports from around the world of tall building fires and the things that went wrong. One of the things that always goes wrong in every major incident is comms.
Yeah.
And if element of that comms is Wi-Fi, internet, broadband, whatever, you've got a problem. So there has to be some measures in place for that. But many fire services, fire and rescue services, have now overcome this, and they have a form of a fire survival guidance app, spreadsheet, team site, whatever it is. Now, it's important to get this right. I mentioned mass emergency evacuation before. If you don't, so we've done two stages now. We've done the proactive control measure of deploying firefighters specifically to assess whether or not the building's behaving effectively. The next stage would be evacuation. Now, if it's a big building and it's going really bad, you might use the term emergency evacuation, because it wasn't an evacuation I was planning. I was planning on the building just following its own evacuation strategy, which was either stay put, defend in place, or make your own way out, whichever it is, all very organised and managed effectively by the building manager. But once I go, it's not happening there, get everybody out, whichever order that is, we're in the worlds of emergency evacuation here. So here we would talk about immediate building evacuation, and that would be a major incident, and I'd count the people, I'd monitor the people, I'd manage the fire survival guidance, I'd do all that. If I don't get the emergency evacuation right, I'm into the next stage, which could be determined mass rescue.
Oh God.
Now, people will now have a picture of what that looks like.
Yeah.
Emergency evacuation is the rapid or the controlled evacuation of maybe a large number of people out of a building that maybe didn't intend to leave the building in the first place, but now I'm saying out you come. Okay? And our intention there now is that people will be alerted to the requirement that I want them to leave the building and start making their way out.
They'll self-mobilise. We'll go banging doors, potentially forcing doors, and
now, I
there'll be a large stream of people.
I talked about a fire before overseas where everybody got out before any water was put on the fire. They didn't need an evacuation alert system because they just WhatsApped each other in their community.
If I had to ask you for a percentage, how useful do you think they are? Because I go to a lot of student accommodations. And
how do I think? How useful is what? Sorry.
Large audible evacuation systems. I think we're becoming quite numb as a society.
Well, an evacuation alert system should not sound unless me, the incident commander, operates it. So we're not talking about alarm systems here. We're talking about emergency alert emergency alert systems here, emergency evacuation systems, which are a British standard 8629. Those are boxes available to me where I can flick the 12th floor, the 11th floor, all out, whichever, separate to the fire alarm system, separate to the fire alarm sounders.
But what happens when you flick that all out on the 12th?
Well, hopefully they don't hear very often. Well, I would hope they start coming out because the building is effectively managed and maintained and people are trained in effectively to do so. Now, if they don't come on out...
I would argue they'll still see it as a random alarm.
If they don't come out, I have to go door knocking anyway, don't I? Because I'm already going to send...
why your stairwell team is all the more valuable.
Yeah.
So I'm already in place.
So I'm already, even if I switch the button on my 8629 evacuation alert system, I'm not satisfied. I'm not going to go home at that point. I'm going to send you up there, Pete. Right, you go to the 12th floor, knock on the door. Yeah. How are you going to knock on the door with a gloved hand? It's quite quiet at 3 o'clock in the morning. Take your hammer with you. Take your sledgehammer with you. Take your hand axe with you. Use that to make a lot of noise. I know that some fire services have bought a priest. A priest, apparently. Many of listeners will know this. I didn't know this. I think it's called a priest. It's used when you go fishing to stun a fish after you've caught the fish. It's a small piece of wood. Looks like a small truncheon. I've seen some fire services around the place have bought small priests, they're called, which are for knocking fishes out, which tuck into their high-rise pack, and the firefighters can use it as a rap on the door. It's very loud. Very large, heavy piece of wood, very effective. Yeah. It's an effective. I hope
it wasn't very expensive. I feel like we've got plenty of things that you could do that with already.
Quite.
Personally,
a hammer. Use a hand axe.
My boot is very loud. I promise you that. So, I turn my back and start kicking that door, it's going to wake everybody up.
But you said you made a good point before. If I have now done my preparing the stairwell with my stairwell protection teams, and I'm ready now to go to I have to now go to an evacuation. Whatever you call it, phased evacuation, staged evacuation, emergency evacuation. I'm changing the evacuation strategy for that building.
Phased and staged. So some people get these confused because some of them are more useful to think of when you think of shopping centres or hospitals, aren't they? I don't think they're all necessarily appropriate. No. Some people use these terms interchangeably with a high-rise building, and it's not really what their name used for.
Yeah, and I think the point of
maybe we won't go down this rabbit hole, but
we're talking about a tall building with residential occupants in. They're either in the building or they're out the building.
Yeah.
Now, that transition of them being in the building to get them out the building, really it's going to be dictated by the scenario you've got, the size of the stairwell. But if people want to leave that building, or I've chosen to evacuate the building because it's building failing, I would find it very difficult to determine which floor is coming out first. I'll start at the top floor. Pete, go to the top floor, evacuate the top floor, knock on them. When you've knocked on every door, then come to the floor below, do the same and keep working your way down. That's a sequential way of thinking about it. If somebody started
at the 10th floor... You wouldn't go floor
above
as well? You wouldn't go top floor and floor above the
Whichever way.
I know. There's a million scenarios we could talk about.
If other people choose to come out in a different order, so be it.
Don't stop them,
So,
yeah.
because the people who's at greatest risk when the building is failing? Well, it's who's at greatest risk at any time. It's the person closest proximity to the fire. They're quite great risk. Maybe also at great risk is the person furthest from a point of safety. So that might be top floor, furthest end from the stairwell. And the other person at greatest risk is the person with reduced mobility or cognitive impairment or something that is going to delay them recognizing the need for them to move, or they're unable
Nearest,
to
furthest away, or takes the longest.
Yeah. So those are the people. Now, as an incident commander with limited or steadily growing resources, all that's going to cause me a nightmare. What helps? The preparation. And that's where the proactive control measure of deploying firefighters into a stairwell to assess, control, coordinate, prepare the means of escape, give advice to occupants, etc. That's where all that control measure you put in pays effect. 9 times out of 10, 90 times out of 100, it won't be required. But the time you do need it, you'll be glad you had it in place.
I want to be respectful of your time, but I'd love to just change gears and go in a very, very different direction as we look to close. And I'd love to ask you about aerial appliances, if I could. Post some large incidents in the UK, there was a political, my words, no one else's, certainly not yours, there was a political shift towards buying some very large aerial appliances in certain places in the UK. And I think the public's perception of, and even some firefighters' perceptions of what those vehicles are for, their usability, deployability, a lot of these things you can't actually get very near some of these buildings. There's very limited places you can even put them. And in my personal opinion, they are not means of escape, irrespective of how tall they are. Theoretically, they're a means of escape, but really they're not. Can you just tell me some of the conversations that happen nationally around the use of these, how we view them as a resource, and maybe it would help as well for members of the public that don't really know what I mean by an aerial or a turntable ladder or an aerial ladder platform. They see these things and they see photos of them at big fires, high-rise, tall building fires. What are they doing? How useful are they? Should we keep buying more of them? How do you see them tactically supporting our plan?
Okay, well, there isn't. I'm not really aware of any national conversation on this because it's not a national decision to resource a fire and rescue service in any particular way.
They're very much local decisions.
Yeah. Let's go. What is an aerial appliance and why do we have an aerial appliance? I'll answer the why first. Okay. And this is a real simplified, probably made up on the spot history lesson. Why do we have aerial appliances? Well, we have aerial appliances because buildings got bigger, taller. They didn't suddenly become taller overnight. It didn't suddenly become 100 meters. No. What were the first tall buildings that caused us fire issues in the UK? They were probably mills and the like. Cotton mills. 5-6 story industrial mills. Cotton mills. Yeah. Now, and you'd have got, around the docks in the cities like London or the cotton mills of the north of England, they were mills. And what developed was the wheeled escapes.
Yeah.
Okay.
See some of them down in Sheffield at the museum still.
The wheeled escapes, which was a long ladder, which was on the back of a fire engine and could be wheeled up to the side, extended, and again, you go to the question, why did we have a wheeled escape? We had a wheeled escape so we could access upper windows and create a means of escape for any occupants. And a mean of entry for firefighters. And a firefighter could stand on the top with a branch lashed off and help put water on the fire. And buildings got taller, bigger, improvements came, and all that has developed into now 64-metre aerial appliance. Turntable ladder is the tallest regularly available firefighting apparatus in the UK.
Yeah. It's a Bronco Skylift one, isn't it?
Not the tallest in Europe. No. And various models and makes, they go up to 80 metres and in advance. And for those that go to places like the Interschutz in Germany, which happens every 4 years, the trade fair, you see some very, very large firefighting apparatus, from China and the likes. Yeah. Now, when we had the wheeled escape for the mill fire and the 5th floor, the mill fire was accessible through the window. You could either put water in. When I was a younger firefighter and we had lots of tall buildings with deck access, maisonettes, windows, a window failing in a flat through a fire was useful because you can now put water into the window.
Yep.
Aerial came into play. And when that window failed on the 18th floor, I didn't really consider that the building had failed.
No.
If you think of now some of the tall buildings that are rising in our built environment, glass-fronted, steel construction, non-openable windows, if there's flames and smoke coming out of the side of that building, it's because there's a hole in the side of the building that's not meant to be there. It's not a window that's failed. The whole building's a window. So when we have, and the reason I'm getting to the point, if we have a predetermined attendance, which is our pre-planned attendance for a tall building fire, which includes an aerial appliance, which could be a turntable ladder, a hydraulic platform vehicle, an aerial ladder platform, tall buildings with cage, water, firefighting access, what's the purpose that we intend it to do? Because the tallest buildings I have in my area, there is not a chance of rescue from the side of the building because there's no openable compartments.
And also the predetermined attendance being 10 minutes, the compartmentation of that building it's not going to externally fail within 10 minutes on that double glazing, half openable window. So you're not going to put a branch through it externally. And
people will tell you, aerial appliances don't do very much on tall buildings. They don't rescue anybody. The last rescue that happened in this area where I am now by turntable ladder air appliance was at the Cube fire that some of you listeners will know. A very effective rescue of somebody in a very precarious position just prior to flashover conditions, and our very, very, I will say, outstanding and heroic crew from the fire and rescue service here. Excellent skills. They got the occupier out by the skin of her teeth, for sure. Which is, everything's okay till it's not okay. And that night, I'm glad they were there. It's a privilege
to have that resource and a skill set in the team that could do that, yeah.
But the point you were getting to is very tall buildings. I understand the
35-floor buildings.
Yeah, I understand the political appetite for such.
It looks like we're doing something really great, and the public think it's a big safety blanket that's going to fix it. Okay.
What happens if you decided not to have it?
How are you going to justify it?
Yeah.
We told you should have got one. You didn't get one. Would it have helped?
That's it.
Everyone else says it would have helped.
You look at the price. You look at the price of any fire appliance or firefighting equipment. You look at the price of it. It might be a lot of money to a public service fire and rescue authority. If the money can come somewhere else, or you can justify it, what price do you put on that? Now, this is not about suddenly doubling the number of your fire engines and everything, but there is new technology coming on all the time, and it is the duty of the fire and rescue service, I think, to assess and consider this new technology. Whether that be robotics, whether that be AI, whether that be drones, whether that be autonomous drones.
Drones that deploy a branch at 100 metres. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Uncrewed surface vehicles. There's at least... There's at least 3 fire services in the northwest now. We're one of them. Have got uncrewed surface vehicles for water rescue now.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah.
The little motors on them.
Yeah.
Awesome, aren't they?
Game changer.
Love it.
When I use the word game changer, let me take you back to tall buildings. The biggest game changer for me, tall building firefighting, and what we're talking about today in my career, I think, has been the smoke curtain.
Oh, yeah.
100%. Now, you mentioned Michael Reich.
Such a frustratingly cheap and obvious solution as well.
You mentioned Michael Reich earlier. Michael Reich is an international, very prominent speaker on smoke control, smoke curtains, positive pressure ventilation. Dr. Michael Reich, good friend of the international fire and rescue service sector. Very much a proponent of smoke blockers, smoke curtains. And he will show you his pictures.
I'll try and remember what episode he was. We'll put it in the notes again.
I've got a photograph of his that I took recently. Triple curtains on one doorway. 3 curtains. You cannot put enough smoke curtains in a tall building firefighting scenario. And I said before, maybe you've got no right putting the door into a fire compartment until you've put a smoke curtain on that door. That's your first fire compartment. Your first fire curtain, smoke blocker, however you want to term it. The next one is the stairwell to the corridor where the fire is. Don't wait for the smoke to be in the corridor. Don't cost anything. You've got it with you.
Yeah, dirt cheap.
Now, it's interesting, the smoke hoods conversation that come into this. So many fire services received money from the government, in the simplest term, to provide smoke hoods based on the number of a quota. Some fire services already bought smoke hoods. And you said before, you go to hotels around the world and you see smoke hoods available. I know an international, as a professor from the UK, I've come across him a few times, and it makes me laugh. He tries to take his smoke hood through customs, and the customs at the USA take it off him. Interesting. That's his world academic research is around evacuation, and that guy carries a smoke hood when he travels internationally. But smoke hoods, they're a control measure too far down the hierarchy of control. By the time I need a control measure of a smoke hood, what I'm accepting is there is smoke in the means of escape.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've spoken about up until now is a proactive control measure to stop that happening. I deploy my firefighters in advance of conditions deteriorating to prepare the stairwell. Part of preparing that stairwell and the means of escape is additional control measures of smoke curtains around the area of the fire. So if it does break into the corridor on the other side and the building starts to fail, I've got time to get people down the stairwell before it breaches the corridors onto the stairwell. Smoke curtains help that, because every time I open a fire door, like you said before, I'm breaching a compartment. Well, a smoke curtain helps massively with that.
Yeah.
So the control measure of the smoke hood, which have been used excessively, you speak to colleagues in London, a number of their fires have even multiple smoke hoods on fires on many, many times. Here too, across the Northwest, multiple times we've used smoke. They're great scenarios and great tools, great control measure, but they almost come too late.
So just again, sorry, for members of the public that don't fully know what we're talking about, we're talking about something that a member of the public just puts over their head and gives them a small period of time to assist, for a firefighter to assist them in their evacuation through an area that is irrespirable. So it's an area that's got smoke in it. They just pull it over, it seals around their neck, slightly claustrophobic for them, but they will then be assisted by a fire crew down a staircase, as an example, and then they'll take it off. And
if many people have flown abroad, they may have seen something looking similar on the read this card in case the plane crashes advice. They're hoods with a visor on the front. It would be a better position to be in is that I get them to the stairwell. They don't need a smoke hood, because that's a very panicking. It's panicking enough being told to get out quick by a firefighter.
Putting that on a child isn't going to go well, is it?
Absolutely not. So just come on out, get in the stairwell. It's safe in the stairwell. Make your way down slowly and effectively. There's a lot of modelling being done, and when I say modelling, computer-aided design modelling by various researchers, including the government, in response to Grenfell, about what a stairwell looks like when people are coming down the stairs. It's really hard to model fear and panic.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drill Book. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drill Book, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, knots and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show. It is, but I spoke to, we had a lady on who does psychology and crowd safety. So it's not too much of a hop, skip and a jump from that, because they do a lot of these models with evacuation plans for stadiums and events and what happens when the crowd panics. And so there are these models out there, and that's what I believe further perpetuates this delusion of how easily we think this is going to go.
Yeah. And it all goes to what you don't want to be a situation where you're evacuating the building in a panic.
No. What's the old, what was the old nightclub where they're all piling through the doors of video? Stardust. Bloody hell, that's horrible, isn't it?
Oh, no, you mean the American one, the Station nightclub.
Station nightclub.
Yeah, the Station nightclub.
Yeah, fireworks go off on the stage, and they're all trying to pile out. And then obviously we can also say the Bradford City football.
Yeah.
Similar analogy, people just getting crushed.
Those are not familiar. There is a YouTube channel, was the Station nightclub, a series, which details quite in effect a nightclub in America. Because
they'd locked the fire exits as well, haven't they? Anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but that was a stairwell to get out of there as well, and I can just see it. I can just see it happening without a lot of control. And this just further supports not your argument, but the national argument for having a very not stringent control, but having that stuff in place to stop this happening. We've got to control that crowd.
Pete, we're building all these buildings which are going up, and we need to advance our firefighting skills. Mm-hmm. I've got no excuse. Now, I have a role on behalf of the National Fire Chiefs Council leading fires in tall buildings. I have a local roles as a incident commander, as a head of a service, and I can settle for nothing less than trying to get us to become outstanding in our preparedness for fighting fires in tall buildings.
I can't be consciously negligent. I can't keep because construction industry is not going to slow down. They will not stop. We can't stop them.
We have to be prepared. Now, we have this stark reality that buildings will fail in fire or might fail in fire. Add on to that, increasing technology in the buildings. We're now parking electric vehicles at the bottom. We're now putting solar panels on, and we've got people bringing in
charging scooters
more and more and more,
whatever it is,
micro-mobility. And there's a phrase, when technology increases, fire risk increases. We're having
Dr. Paul Christensen back on for a second episode very soon.
We're not keeping up. We're not keeping up with it, and it's not our fault. Nope. Ask any fire service around the country, how do you put out an electric car fire? We don't know. We don't know yet. But we're parking them underneath our tall buildings. So we have to be prepared to know, right, if it goes wrong, can I get people out of this building? The only way you can do that safely is you prepare in advance. I can't prepare in advance now because I'm not at the building. But as soon as I go to the building, when the fire alarms go off and somebody reports a fire, I am going to make sure that I put in place a proactive control measure that includes sending firefighters into the stairwell. And we can have the conversation all day long whether they're wearing breathing apparatus or not. I don't need to have that conversation today. It's however I do it, I will deploy firefighters into the stairwell to prepare that stairwell in case I need it, to start providing advice to occupants, to report on the tenability back to me as the incident commander of what it's looking like up there. I'd aid my situational awareness so I can carry out effective decision making. And if people are starting to come down the stairwell, start monitoring those people and communicate that back to me.
And recording them all.
Yeah.
Where did they come from?
We've got no excuse. We've known about this for 40 years that this was an issue. Easy. We've reported it. The government have reported it in the 80s and the 90s. We kept ignoring it. And as incident commanders and firefighters,
we've had horrifically concerning incidents that have actually happened now.
We've learned the hard way. We've learned the hard way, and I've got colleagues and friends, and even if you've never met them, you know them by name, colleagues, because they are colleagues, even if you've never met, in London Fire Brigade, that I am so sorry that they had to go through what they went through.
We let them down.
In order for us to listen. And because we weren't listening, but we're listening now. And
if we'd have known better, we'd have done better.
Yeah.
And now it's undeniable. I want to be respectful of your time, Ben. We've covered such a beautiful range and host of things. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask if there's anything you would like to quickly circle back to, if there's any closing thoughts you'd like us to finish with before we look to wrap it up today.
I think, Pete, it's quite important to consider, we've had a real good chat here, and I think there's a lot of conversations when you talk about firefighting, and we'll make fun of each other in the fire service, don't we? Oh, smoky stories and swinging the lamps and all this.
Yeah.
But actually, this is what we joined to do, is to talk about fires. And when you end up with, I feel quite privileged. I have quite a level of responsibility locally, regionally, nationally. Bestowed the responsibility of leading the National Fire Chiefs Council Fires and Tall Buildings Group to advance National Fire Chiefs Council operational guidance, to support local fire and rescue services with peer support and networking and international sector. I'm really, really privileged to have that. And I think it's really important that people do sit around and have these conversations around such,
we owe that to it. Yeah. It's your responsibility to create environments of psychological safety where we can have these uncomfortable conversations. We're not accusing anybody of doing it wrong. We're not accusing anybody of being stupid or reckless or dangerous, but we need to feel comfortable enough, even if we're not where we'd like to be, to recognise where we are and collectively discuss some potential ways to move us all forward collectively.
If this was easy, I always say, nothing's easy. If this was easy, we wouldn't be having the conversation. No. And if it was easy, we'd all be wearing the same uniform down the country. We can't even decide on the same colour fire engine because we've all got different shades of red. We don't agree on anything. The only thing the UK Fire and Rescue Service pretty much has agreed on is the size of a male and female instantaneous coupling on a 45 and 70mm.
And that was probably prescribed to us by the manufacturers.
Everything else is different. And our policies, but it is important because unless you're London, and maybe just about if you're somewhere like Greater Manchester or West Midlands, if you get a major incident in a tall building fire, you need help from your neighbours. So we have a duty to have a common way of looking at these incidents. And if it was easy, we wouldn't be falling out about it. We just get on with it. So, I do encourage, somebody like me or local fire and tall buildings leads, me certainly, I'm not a hard person to find and track down. So, if people want to have further conversations, I welcome that conversation. I speak on behalf of Ben Levy, the operational firefighter and fires and tall buildings lead, not necessarily on behalf of my fire and rescue service and certainly not on behalf of the National Fire Chiefs Council. But these are important conversations that need to be had around the mess table. It's all very well. It's like, for the motorcyclist amongst us. Oh, there's no point lying at the side of the road being hit by the person who pulled out in front of you and go, well, my fault. They drove into me. You have to take proactive actions in advance so that even if somebody else is in the wrong, we're still on our shiny side up.
Something like that I always say to motorcyclists. Doesn't matter who was in the wrong, we all lose. Everybody
that's loses. Right. So and it's a scenario here, isn't it? This is very simply accepting that these buildings are liable to fail, or not the buildings. We are going to come across a building that will fail in fire again. Definitely. Very soon. It's happening 100%. Everywhere. And if you don't think that's the case, well, we need to think again. Thankfully, some of those buildings are not going to be very tall and you're just going to get away with it. And the Cube fire was not very tall building. It was 18 metres tall. Thankfully, it was a short enough route to the bottom that people could get out. If it had been the same scenario 3 times the height, God knows what would have happened. I hate to think. Otherwise, you end up with a Grenfell Tower where you've got a lot of people coming out of a building which is rapidly failing in fire. And I think, people lost their lives there. We've got colleagues and friends in the fire and rescue service whose lives from attending that incident have been changed beyond all recognition because of the memories they take away with them. We owe it to the memory of those that lost their lives and families that lost loved ones at Grenfell and our friends and colleagues that attended to keep thinking about this subject, to make sure that, I hope it never happens again, but when it does happen again, we are as prepared as we are. Because the firefighters that attended Grenfell, and I don't mean by London Fire Brigade, I mean just by the UK fire sector and everybody else that sort of supporters, we have all been let down because we thought we could put those fires out. And you know what? I'm not so sure we can put the fires out. So what are we going to do instead? Assess the means of escape. Be ready to put people in that stairwell and get them out if you ain't going to put the fire out. Because I'm not sure that in the extreme conditions that we have witnessed around the country and around the world, I don't think simultaneous deployment of firefighters to put a fire out and simultaneous deployment of firefighters into a stairwell to do a mass rescue, God forbid, emergency evacuation. I don't think it's all compatible in one staircase.
No, it's not viable.
So
you could say all of those things in a level 4 incident command reaccreditation, but practically it won't happen.
No.
It just won't happen.
No.
The fog of war, as people in other sectors would state it, that's just not going to work.
Yeah.
There's too much chaos in a very confined, chaotic developing space. Ben, thanks so much for your time there, brother. That has been incredibly valuable. I know it's an emotive subject. I thank you for your openness and your transparency and your honesty. In coming and talking about this. It's something people really want us to discuss. We are soon to see the final installment of the Grenfell inquiry, and Danny's a close friend of mine. She does look forward to, because I see her every year at WFS. She says, I want to come on and talk about it when everything's finished and all that jazz. And Danny was not, she's just an example of someone.
Yeah, no, Danny, she does.
She's not the be all and end all, and she doesn't hold all responsibility, but someone, again, we just want to shine all the lights on these things so that we don't have to, was it Winston Churchill? If we fail to learn from these things, we're doomed to repeat them, So thank you for shining some of these learnings. I'm a knuckle dragger with a wide level of shallow knowledge. So it always helps to have someone like you come and give that greater depth from a subject matter expert. I'm going to close us there. Send my love to the team, send my love to the family, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. The Firefighters podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you are in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.